Okay, everyone, welcome to the Celtic Way Weekly. John, we're chatting managers today. Are things starting to swing into life?
A wee bit for me. I think it's just over the last week or so. I think it's dialed down to maybe two or three guys that maybe you have an inkling that might be on the immediate horizon rather than the list of eight or nine that we saw in weeks gone by. So it's getting there, isn't it? There's tentative signs that Celtic are making some sort of progress. And again, I'm not expecting anything imminent from Celtic. I mean, there's reports of you know, discussions in London this week. By all accounts and by what I know, I think very preliminary discussions. I don't think anything's been finalised or anything's about to be announced or anything like that. Saying that, again, like I said last week, it would be funny if I said that and then in between recording and this going out on YouTube, that an announcement is exactly what happens. But in all seriousness, I think it at least looks like Celtic won't be, going forward with Matt O'Neill and Sean Maloney too much longer. Maybe the game after the international break, but I don't really expect it to linger on for weeks and weeks and months and months. It looks like Celtic are making movement.
So you reckon, as you say, rather than a list of eight, that even as far as the club are concerned, do you think they know roughly who they're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the last few days there's been a lot of chat about two or three people in particular. I'm not sure if that's I think that people may be getting a bit too excited about betting odds and
Oh, yeah.
odds on favourites and companies stopping betting for advertisement purposes and all sorts of things. So I think there's a slight getting carried away with things a little bit, but at the same time, I do think the people that are being discussed publicly are some of the people that Celtic are looking at. Then definitely.
So, hello everyone, lovely to have you with us. Thanks for watching. Comment away, keep watching. Plan for today's show, I think, is basically we're going to have a bit of chat about Celtic maybe first,
Yeah.
because there was a couple of games since we last spoke, I think, or certainly one, and also then move on to the managerial stuff. As John says, there's a few names that have been spoken about more than others, so we can kind of get into those guys. I think we've been doing a bit of research into these people over the last few days,
Hmm.
and we can look at potentially how they would fit into things at Celtic, because maybe the environment at Celtic is a little bit different to the clubs they are currently at. So just first of all, we had the weekend against
Mm.
Kelly. Any takeaways from that for you?
Just that it was good. Again, I think one of the big concerns when Brendan Rodgers leaves the club is that everything just totally unravels and that Celtic just become a bit of a mess and the season just completely falls apart. And there was no guarantee that Matt O'Neill and Sean Maloney would be able to stop that from happening, but they have. And there was more signs of that against Kilmarnock again. Another 4-0 win at home, bit of a confidence boosting win, pretty routine win. And actually, routine wins have been something that's been missing a fair amount, for going back months. Just a bog standard routine win where Celtic just get the job done and then finish the game off late. So I had no complaints coming into the match, and I'm pleasantly surprised by a couple. I thought Rio Otate, who's been pretty rubbish this season, I thought he had a really good game on Sunday. And yeah, and I was just happy just to see a routine win with no fuss, and it's kind of, I think it sets the scene for everything. If Celtic are about to make a managerial change, it just felt like a moment that set the scene for everything. And Matt O'Neill pretty making it clear that I don't think he's expecting to stay on too much longer at Celtic either. So it's been nice for Matt O'Neill. I think it was about what was expected, wasn't it? You would hope for the three domestic games winning, and then the European game always looked tough and was always going to be difficult. So yeah, but with regard to Sunday in particular, no massive takeaways from it myself.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say better than expected with Martin O'Neill, because I
Yeah.
had real doubts
Okay.
over that derby against Rangers.
Hmm.
I honestly felt going into it that we might struggle, certainly with Brendan Rodgers as the manager, even when Martin O'Neill came in. So I think to win that, and I know people look at it as you only beat a 10-man, or you drew with a 10-man Rangers in 90 minutes. But I mean, that's not how cup ties are judged. And I thought that was a really big win. And I mean, I looked at the stat the other day that we've scored more goals at home in the league under Martin O'Neill this season than we managed under Brendan Rodgers, which kind of says a lot. So clearly we've seen an improvement in the team. It's a difficult place. The team's very limited, I think.
Yeah,
There's a lot of injuries there as well. Like I did a squad thing the other day in Celtic
yeah,
AM where I looked at the squad and I think we've got 6 injuries and most of them long term, and potential for players leaving for African Cup of Nations, Balikwisha,
yeah.
Tenekti, maybe Iheanacho as well. I think there's tough times coming, kind of late December, early January, but at least there's still a desire there from the team to kind of get beyond challenges.
Yeah, how do we look at it as well? I think I worked out in my head it was something like so far this season. I think Celtic have played a match every 5.5 days on average. I think between now and mid February, I think there's 22 games or 21 games, 22 games in 84 days, which is a game every 3.8 days on average. Which, considering the injury problems that Celtic have already had this season, which aren't just the current collection, there's been injuries throughout, since the start of the campaign. It doesn't particularly bode well that it becomes much busier and the squad becomes weaker as a result as well. So I agree with you. I actually think maybe the more pertinent question this week and kind of moving forward for whoever's in charge, whether it's Martin O'Neill or a new manager, is actually the state of the squad's looking pretty rough at the moment. Like you say, when you take into account the African Cup of Nations as well, which 2, possibly 3 players heading off, as you say, and it's a difficult one, Hamish. And even
Yeah.
look, even if you limp until January, which is about 6 weeks away or something, Celtic have hardly been proactive in the transfer market of late. You don't really have faith that they've got players lined up, even on a short-term basis. They're preoccupied with trying to find a new manager. So I'm actually pretty worried about the squad, even with all the manager situation, just the players on the pitch at the moment. And this run of games that we've got coming up is daunting. Yeah, it's very daunting.
And is there any solution to that? Like before the window opens, it's kind of hard to see one because you're going to be, you know, going back to the well with a number of players because we just don't have other options.
It's going to come down to like an improvisation, I think, Hamish, of like you're hoping that players can step up and perform in different roles. Now, fingers crossed Marcello Sarace isn't out for more than a few weeks. Possibly that he will be, though. But, you would expect like possibly someone might start to experiment with Hayato and Amura again. You might see Liam Scales shifted out to the left if Simpson Pusey can get a game as a centre half alongside Austin Trusty finally, now that he's made his debut. So I think there's a bit of tweaks there. None of it's ideal. I'm not saying Liam Scales is a great choice to be Celtic's left back in support of Kieran Tierney, but Kieran Tierney's not going to play Thursday, Sunday for 3 months. That's just not going to happen. I don't think so. I think there is we're going to have to see some adaptability in the squad, and the same Daisy Maeda is going to probably have to play left wing, striker, and right wing before he leaves as well, which is looking like January. That's another concern. You're looking at January as a chance to strengthen. There might be actually a couple of players leaving as well. So it's grim stuff when you look at the squad, just the raw numbers. But as someone made the point to me on social media the other day, is that any manager in Scotland would love the squad that Celtic have at their disposal to then go on and continue and push on in the Scottish Premiership. So whether it's Martin O'Neill or a new manager coming in, I don't think there's too many excuses. Yeah, it's rough injury-wise, but the squad that Celtic have is, arguably more talented still than the rest of Scotland.
I think that's the key. Like obviously the European stuff is
Yeah.
incredibly difficult now, but certainly domestically we should still, regardless of the amount of injuries and the amount of like off form players and the general state of the squad, even without injuries like the right wing position, etc., we should still be good enough to win each game, and you kind of only have to take game at a time. I wonder if we don't get on well in our next European game, which is Feyenoord, which you could definitely see as losing. And if we lose, would probably just about end our hopes of making it through. I think we'd need 6 points from 9, which, is possible, but we've got some tougher games coming up. I wonder if we might reach a point where the new manager prioritises the domestic stuff. And I don't think you'd get too many, complaints at that point.
No, and listen, I mean, we've been talking for the last 6 months about Celtic pushing forward in Europe, and that's the benchmark for Celtic. And regardless of whether it's the Champions League or the Europa League, like that's something that Celtic have to aspire to. So I don't want to come across as too much of a hypocrite, but if you're being brutally honest, Europe is kind of done. I feel like for Celtic to have a meaningful impact this year, maybe you sneak into the top 24, but how far are Celtic going beyond that? And it's now it's a long term picture now at Celtic in terms of like just what is Celtic's current situation in European football? What do the club want to change to have an impact going forward? And I don't think it rests on Feyenoord or any of the matches that have Celtic have coming up. So I'm kind of with you. I'm like, it's a shame to say it, but I just feel like you can't let Hearts win the league. You can't let Rangers win the league. Europe, I mean, Celtic they're halfway through. They've not done well. They've been average at best. And yeah, look, I'm not. People will be probably moaning at me and going, "John, you've got Celtic knocked out of Europe already." But I'm just looking at the squad as it is, looking at all the games ahead, and at some point, I think you do have to start picking what games you prioritise. And if you're asking me, I would prioritise the league and the League Cup final over 4 more games in Europe, where Celtic probably aren't going to go anywhere anyway, frankly.
Yeah, I think it's the fixtures we've got left in the Europa League as well. Utrecht, I think I'm right in saying, is the final game. Like there's a chance that could be irrelevant at that point. You're looking at needing 10 points, and I think our next 3 are Feyenoord away, Roma at home, and Bologna away. Like those are really tough games. I know Feyenoord are behind us, but I just think if maybe the Feyenoord game or even the Roma game after it, if we don't win either of them, you're kind of looking at that being over. So that's something to keep an eye on. I agree. Like it was that way. There is a contradiction there because last season and the start of this season we have all been saying, oh, the domestic stuff is not boring, but we're kind of well ahead of the rest, and it's being best in Scotland isn't the achievement we all want. We want to achieve something on the continent. But things change, and a lot has changed at Celtic over the past, number of months. And I think we are in a position now where you do feel we have to reassert a bit of dominance domestically. But that can be exciting as well. Like title races are probably the most exciting thing about Celtic. And it looks like we're going to have a pretty good one second half of the season. With Hearts, certainly. I think Rangers are probably going to kind of be in there as well. They've steadied the ship domestically. So it could still be an exciting season, even if the European stuff isn't there.
Yeah, you take it for granted until Hearts are 7 points ahead, But, I mean, as well, it's still to really be seen how sustained this Hearts run will be. There's a few signs that, it's starting to creak a little bit over at Tynecastle. And how will they fare? They've got a trip to Celtic Park in early December, I think, as well. So they've got a defining period coming up as well. It's not just Celtic under pressure, but it's not just Celtic who have massively important matches coming up that will say a lot about the long term of the season into the new year. It's just the winter football is great, and you know how I feel about international football, Hamish. I think
even Scotland on the verge of qualifying for a World Cup, it's not doing it for you.
I would take Scotland at a major tournament. It's just not something I'm particularly massively interested in. And I just think 3 international breaks at the start of a season is just absurd. Just so stop-start. I like it when it gets to this point where Celtic come back after the international break, just focus in on game after game after game after game, and this is where you're really going to find out what the mettle of this team is and what their heart is and desire is, whoever's in the dugout, whether it's Martin O'Neill or whoever. I think it's down to the players and how they feel about their season, how they feel about playing for Celtic as well. So it's all to do and a lot of good stuff ahead, I think.
Remember everyone, 2 international breaks this time next season. They're merging 2 of them into a longer one. So although it's the same kind of time, it might seem slightly better.
I'll maybe take a beach holiday for that extended one.
I was going to say that. I was going to say that if you've got plans for that. No podcast during that period next year. Right, where do you want to start with this manager stuff? Who do you want to start with?
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken a lot about Kieran McKenna, I think, on the show. We've not really spoke about Kjell Knutsen to an extent. Wilfried Nancy, I think, and Wilfried Nancy. I'm not sure how people are pronouncing it. I'm not sure how you're pronouncing it. You always come with the good
French, isn't he?
Yeah, you always.
By the way, just while we're on it, John, Kjetil Knutsen. Come on now.
Kjetil Knutsen. Okay, I'll go with that. I'll try and get to grips with that if he arrives in Glasgow. Which, look, I'm quite sceptical about, to be honest, whether he's going to be coming from Bodo Glimt.
Yeah.
A lot of chat, I think that's maybe where a lot of fans have their hopes at the moment in terms of he looks like the most outstanding candidate on paper. I don't think he's a project of any sorts. I don't think he's kind of half baked. I think he's got a proven track record of having a team in Europe who can compete with teams more illustrious with bigger wage budgets, bigger transfer budgets than he has. So it's an interesting one. But Wilfried Nancy, I think, is just like, he seems to be the one that all the chat is about this week. And I don't know if that's just because he has a fantastic agent, Hamish, or whether he's genuinely on the brink of being appointed as Celtic manager. There's links to Paul Tisdale. What I will say about him is that it's one of those ones where you look at it and you're just like immediately skeptical about it, and you see all the bad parts of it, and then you look a little bit deeper and you start to see, well, this is why Celtic are perhaps at least interested in him. I'm not saying he's the perfect fit for Celtic or that it's not a massive risk to appoint him. I think all of that's true, but you do start to see little bits and pieces of who this guy is, how he conducts himself, how he deals with players, how he deals with football, most importantly on the pitch, how he sets up tactically, what his kind of track record is of kind of this winning team that he's managed to form, playing an attractive style of football. And you start to see, well, it's understandable that Celtic are at least looking at this guy, and that's what I would say about him at this stage. And I like some of the things I see, and then in the back of my mind, I'm like, I have these doubts about this. His first big job in European football. He's only been a manager for 4 or 5 years at the most, I think, at a senior level. Coming into Celtic with all the baggage that is here in the midst of a season with this depleted squad, and you just start to shiver a little bit, Hamish, I have to be honest with you. So I kind of see good and bad points with this guy, and that's kind of where I sit on him at the moment.
Yeah, I think we've both been doing a fair bit of reading into him this week, and I think you're right. I mean, there's a fair bit of scepticism out there, judging from the comments that I've seen on my channel, Celtic AM. The majority don't want him. I think there's a minority out there who think that he could be a pretty good fit. I must admit, having done a good bit of kind of looking in various videos, interviews he's done, people talking about him, I do think there's something there. I know that the Ange comparison is very easy, and I know that there's differences there. Ange had a lot of experience, 20 odd years of being a manager. As you say, Nancy has, I think, 4.5 years. However, he has been an assistant coach, but before then he's also been a coach, I think, for around about 20 years. So he's not new to the kind of non-playing style of things. So I think I just see a few things people are saying, like, oh, he's only, making out as if he was playing 5 years ago. No, like he finished playing about 20 years ago, I think, in his late 20s. He's 48 years old. And the similarities with Ange, and what I mean by that is that virtually anyone you hear who knows about him properly talks, really highly of him. People in America, people in the MLS, which, reminds me a lot of what was happening with Ange. I think there is a bit of kind of snobbery there, if I'm honest, and I guess there's always going to be an element of that. But I think when you look, deeper into him, he has achieved things in his short managerial career. It's not just like he's kind of an up-and-coming manager who people can see signs in. Like, he's actually achieved things of substance at Columbus Crew. He has won the MLS Cup, which is basically like their league title, their end-of-season playoffs. Best team in America, effectively. He won the MLS Leagues Cup as well, which is their cup competition, which also includes Mexican sides. Even got to the final of the CONCACAF Champions Cup in 2024 as well. So he's achieved things. I think he has a playing style that is quite exciting as well, and is very, I think it's important to say, is very different from Brendan Rodgers as well. I think I've seen a lot of people saying, we don't need a possession based manager. If you look into Wilfried Nancy's style, it's exploiting space basically. So whether that's short passing or if the gaps are in behind, he's not afraid to go longer. Which I must admit, anyone who watched me, do a deep dive into him the other day, I did say that his teams don't go long. That's incorrect. They do go long. From time to time. I'm quite excited. I do have reservations as well, John, and even when you're saying there, a guy coming into the kind of mess we're in on and off the pitch at the moment, there are doubts there, but there were also real doubts over someone like Ange, and I do see similarities there.
So one of the similarities that I see with Ange, and like I don't want to go too deep down the new Ange rabbit hole, because I think
Yeah, yeah,
it's I get the point that everyone's making, and the comparisons are obvious. One of the things in terms of the style of football that Columbus Crew play that I kind of noticed watching some footage and watching a few kind of tactical videos was this concept of almost player improvisation to an extent, where they fit into this structure, this defined structure, but they have the personal responsibility to make decisions and have improvisation in the game and attack, like you're saying, attack space when it opens up, regardless of what your position is, regardless of where you have in the pitch, and just really have this laser focus on always looking to play forward. Whether you're a centre back, and I think you utilises the centre backs in quite wide positions to kind of stretch teams right across the pitch, and actually sometimes in attack you see like a almost a forward line of a five of sorts,
so
up
it's like a
against the opposite.
3-4-3 is his
Yeah,
formation.
yeah, it's a 3-4-3, and I think there's like two central players in behind a striker. But what that does is that you've got the two wing backs really pushing up. Then you've got those two players and the striker. So you've almost got five players right across the opposition defensive line, whether they're playing a four or a five or whatever. And what that does is just really stretches the game. Yes, it leaves space to exploit. And I think defensively there have been some question marks about Columbus Crew in recent seasons. But yes, it's exciting, and that's kind of my point. It's exciting. I think it would be interesting for supporters, and I think it would be something to buy into on the pitch that maybe what we haven't seen since Ange is kind of my point. I think the fundamental difference from what I've read and heard and have listened to interviews with some of the players who's worked under him is players love him. He's very much like he's so invested in players, not just like
Okay.
in terms of what the players can do for him, which you got a sense from Ange sometimes of like Ange has these players and the players love him because he wins and he has clear instructions and it works. Whereas players love Wilfried Nancy because he's very invested in them as players on and off the pitch, and it kind of almost a similar way to Brendan Rodgers to an extent. In that he's a much more personable manager, I think, with players than Ange Postecoglou was. So that's another interesting note. I also think he's got a touch of that charismatic flair about him. He's got some inspirational quotes over the years as well, and he speaks very well in the media. And he's not afraid to be honest in the media too. He's been very honest on occasion. He's had some outbursts as well when he's had to discipline certain players, etc. So I think the all in package is that he'd be a very interesting, exciting appointment in the kind of week to week action of Scottish football and Celtic. Whether it would be successful or not, I obviously don't know, but I do think it would be something that fans might be able to get behind. There's an element of an underdog there as well, isn't there, that Celtic fans
Yeah,
love. Celtic are
yeah.
not an underdog club, but you cannot say that. Not anymore, not in the last 20 years. Maybe once upon a time Celtic were the underdog club, but not anymore. And so, but when these characters come along that you can kind of root for, I think it does allow fans to get behind them. But at the same time, I do think there would be a lot of scepticism about his appointment. And then, do you want that division and uncertainty from the off? And especially coming in after a figure like Martin O'Neill, I think it's difficult. I think for a guy like Wilfried Nancy to just immediately become a success at Celtic, which is really what you need from anyone coming in at the moment.
Yeah, because we're in the midst of the season,
Yeah, yeah,
and you know the challenges are right there. There's no real bedding in period. I mean, I think we know from recent experience that regardless of the reaction to whoever the new manager is, everyone will get on side, and then that manager will, whoever it is, will be given an opportunity to prove themselves. He appears to be a real leader. I think someone who would have us united behind the team, which is just personally speaking is something I fancy. I fancy a bit of that. It's just felt over the past couple of years, kind of even when Brendan Rodgers was at the peak when he first came back around about a year ago. It just never really kind of felt like that feeling we had before. And yeah, you're right. We don't need to keep looking back, but I do fancy a bit of that again. Just out on and I would urge people just look a bit into him and
yeah.
watch some of his post match interviews. They're very easy to find. Maybe not his press conferences as much, because maybe when you first watch a press conference, you don't necessarily get the vibe that he's incredibly motivating. But again, if you looked at someone like Ange's press conferences at times, they were a little bit dull. But in terms of his post-match interviews, impossible is just an opinion was one of his
Yeah,
quotes. Another one that jumped into me, life is about emotions and joy is a big part of my values.
yeah. Yeah, that impossible as an opinion thing was directly after I think they beat LAFC in the
Yeah.
MLS Cup final. It was impossible as an opinion, just enjoy it and we're going to grow. And this is what happened. That's what he said his message to the players was before the final. He also said, just regard to kind of how he treats his players, my job is to guide players because they have to be able to find the solution by themselves, which again kind of speaks into this kind of thing where he puts a lot of responsibility onto the players on the pitch, gives them the guidance to go and express themselves, which is good. I think that's what you want from a team. He says, for me, I try to figure out an image to help my players understand what I want in terms of style of play. I think a chess game and boxing is something I came up with because boxing represents the intensity that I want to see with the ball and without the ball, and also mentally for my players. The chess game is how we're going to put out in the opposition, how we're going to manipulate the opposition. So a bit of cliched football chat there to an extent, but he's a thinker about football. That comes across in all his interviews as well. He's not, there is definitely things to like about him, and why I'm kind of saying all this is because I think he's leaving Columbus Crew. I think his next move will be to European football. Maybe this is all part of that campaign to get him a job in Europe, is to link him with the first big job in Europe that comes up. But he's going to be at a club, whether it's in the UK, in France, somewhere else in Europe. He is going to pop up, and I'm actually now intrigued about how he does in European football, whether it's at Celtic or not, because he's definitely an interesting character.
So I mean, it's probably going to, if he is indeed interviewed, it's going to be interesting. It's going to come down to whether he can convince Dermot Desmond, basically, whether Dermot Desmond looks into the white of his eyes and sees a leader of Celtic and all that kind of nonsense we'll hear in months to come. So on Knutson as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of looked a bit into him and the structure at Bodo Glimpton.
Yeah.
Everything I read about that kind of told me that he wouldn't come to Celtic in the state that we're in at the moment. Like Glimpton in a different world from us in every regard. They come from the city of Bodo, which is has a population of less than Celtic Park holds. It's a real family club. They have no owner making all the decisions. It's about everyone chipping in for the greater good. I saw their director of football likening it to like a Formula One team where everyone in the background, puts in the work so that the car can go a second faster or something like that. I like this quote from the director of football, Havard Zachariasen, when he said, "The perfect transfer window for us is when we're already done when it opens." And I'm just thinking, Knutson going from that, where he's incredibly involved in recruitment, to come into Celtic where he's not going to have that same control. I just don't see it happening unless Celtic are prepared to make massive changes as well.
You just look at Bodo Glimt and you just look at this kind of Scandinavian utopia of like, and you read about this. They've got a guy who's like an ex-Air Force pilot, and I think he does meditation sessions, and they have group discussions within the dressing room. I think the players have a weekly meeting with senior staff about the state of the football club and how everything functions. And like you say, that kind of Formula One team mentality where everyone's just kind of bonded together for one purpose. And it's a very unique situation that, of course, Knutson has had a role in forging. It's not a mistake that he's been at the helm of that, but it's a completely different thing to what is at Celtic currently. And also historically, Celtic have, they've got excited about a manager initially, maybe giving him a little bit of freedom at the start, but then slowly as time progresses, the club take more and more control away from the man in charge. And I just don't think it's a good fit. I think he's a good manager. I think he's a great manager. I think if in an ideal world in Celtic were this modern thinking progressive club that excels in all aspects and has a fantastic football department in place, I think he could be the perfect fit. I just don't see it at this particular juncture about where Celtic are right now. And I just don't see, first of all, I don't see him coming. And second of all, if he did come, I would be worried about the fit, the cultural fit between him and what he's achieved at Glimt and what the situation is at Celtic. So I'm a bit sceptical about that one as much as I'm a fan of him. You can't argue with what he's done. He's been exceptional. Like,
you don't think there's any argument that he's just a great manager at Bodo Glimt rather than being a great manager, full stop?
that's a potential too. That is a potential too. And how does he work out with that? What is a pretty unique environment? I don't think there's many clubs functioning in European football in the way they do. And it's obviously had results. I think their wage bill is less than £10 million, which is 4 or 5 times less than Celtic is. Yet they're managing to do things in Europe that Celtic haven't been able to do for over 2 decades now. And credit has to go to him, but I do think it's all a part of his support staff around him and the figures he has around him. Players leave Glimt and come back quite quickly, even when they've been sold for a profit. That's kind of the vibe that they've got there. And I understand why Celtic fans are going, get this guy. He's got a proven. He's tested on big European nights. He knows how to land a bloody nose on more illustrious opponents. But just everything that Glimt are and everything they are, Celtic seem to not be at the moment. And I don't see how that would work.
Yeah, as I said, I think we would have to make big changes there. Would you potentially have to look at, you would have to look at a change in football and structure, like a kind of director of football, potentially someone like that guy I mentioned that he works with at Bodo Glimt. Like, could that work? There'd be big questions over whether the director of football would want to leave Bodo Glimt as well, but potentially Knutson working with someone he knows. But again, they'd have to be given power that the board and particularly Dermot Desmond are not going to relinquish.
It comes down to me is how much trust would Celtic actually put in these guys and people who are effectively outsiders to an extent. How much trust and what kind of remit would they be given? I just can't see it, frankly. I think it's what Celtic need. I don't get me wrong. I think Celtic's longest serving manager since Martin O'Neill left the first time was Neil Lennon, I think, who stayed for 4 seasons. There's no continuity at Celtic. We can't keep pinning all our hopes on these managers who, at the very maximum, are going to stay for 4 years, probably going to leave after 2 or 3, either acrimoniously or in high spirits as Ange did before when he went to Tottenham Hotspur. We can't keep having this cycle of manager comes in, everyone's excited, it goes well for a bit, and then Celtic are in the same boat again. Celtic needs some form of sporting structure and executive level around whoever is in charge of Celtic moving forward. And I'm going to keep banging that drum, frankly, because I think you look at the kind of guys that Celtic have been linked with, Knutson, Hayden at Club Brugge. If you look at Club Brugge, they've had 6 managers, I think, in the last 6 years, but they've got to the last 16 of the Champions League twice. I think they got to the semi-final of the Conference League as well. It's not really, but their managers have done well along the way, some of them, but it's not really been about their managers. It's about everything that they've put in place behind them. So how much stock can you put in a figure like Hayden when it's like Club Brugge are so set up for success, and the way that they've managed to transform their club over the last 15 years or so with consistent executive power that is so laser focused on sport and achievement. The chief executive they had in their place there for 12 years or so was a former player, a former coach. The guy they've got in charge now is much younger, but he's a former youth coach and came through kind of their coaching setup there, and is now suddenly has executive power of the sporting department. He's given a budget, of course, by people who run the business of Club Brugge, but he has the power to then use that budget and how he best sees fit for the betterment of Bruges. And you can see how agile they were in the summer market there. And they're in the Champions League against this year. And I just think Celtic need to get to grips with that. I don't think Celtic will ever fundamentally change in Europe until they start to have this grander picture of youth development, really aggressive recruitment, and having this overarching philosophy that managers can plug into from time to time. Because as I say, a Celtic manager, his lifespan at the very, very most is 4 years in the most. And that was probably a pretty unique example just because Neil Lennon had it pretty good there, winning title after title. I think 3 managers is really the lifespan of a Celtic manager. And how can you build a long-term plan if you're changing your manager every 3 years and you don't have that sporting expertise within the club? Look at Celtic, Hamish. Their kind of head of football operations, their head of scouting, whatever these job titles have been over the years. I think there's been 4 guys in the last 6 years, six or 7 years. Nicky Hammond, Lee Congerton, Paul Tisdale, Mark Lawwell. Yeah, Celtic change these guys so often because they don't, first of all, they don't have the power and they become frustrated, I think, in their roles. But secondly, they just don't seem to have this overarching view of what Celtic need in the long term. And Celtic changing that kind of figure more often than managers, I think, is really bad news and is really at the heart of why we've seen Celtic stagnate in a European context.
It feels like some of these guys were like appointed kind of by managers as well, whereas it should really be the other way around, and a lot of them are used as scapegoats when things don't go well. Just kind of on that point, a lot of change at the club at the moment. Brendan Rodgers has obviously left. We know about John Kennedy, the rest of the coaching staff, kind of analysts, I think, as well. We had the head of scouting, Jay Lefebvre, leaving the other day. Talk about the youth academy, Stevie Hamill potentially stepping up at the end of the season. A lot of change happening. Are we actually going to see change here, or is it just kind of personnel change?
I don't know if it's just moving around deck chairs or what. It is odd to me that I think something's happened where someone's just went, no, get rid of the lot of them. And I think, again, I don't mean to keep saying this, Hamish, but I really do think that everything that's happened over the last few weeks has been Desmond getting sick of what he's seen from Celtic and maybe wondering whether it is time for a clear out and to clear the decks for someone new coming in and what that looks like. I think there's maybe signs that maybe Celtic are actually about to have the reset that maybe people crave and are wanting. I don't know how in depth that would be or who would be leading that charge. I don't particularly have faith in Paul Tisdale being the man to enact transformational change at Celtic.
The weekly Paul Tisdale comment from John. Here we go. Love it.
And our weekly Where is Michael Nicholson segment as well. We can do that one. No, but in all seriousness, is he the man to really enact this grand change at Celtic? I'm not convinced of that at all. So
they obviously see something in him if they're giving him that kind of power to go and, or is it simply that he's just the kind of last guy there?
Yeah, well, there's been chat that you had like a kind of, I think one of Dermot Desmond's acquaintances, I think, knew him or something of that ilk. I don't think this has come up because Celtic scoured the market for the best possible guy to head up recruitment and they've put in Paul Tisdale. And I just look at a guy like Paul Tisdale, again, I don't want to make too many comparisons to Club Brugge because it's kind of overwrought to an extent. Club Brugge have a lot of money themselves. They're making a lot of profit on their transfers. They've got a lot of resources at the moment. But you look at the guys who are in charge of their departments. I think the guy in charge of their analytics department, I think, has a PhD in machine learning and stuff of that ilk, like a proper data scientist. Where Celtic have like Paul Tisdale and his kind of his algorithm, Dr. Football or whatever. I don't want to disparage him too much. I'm sure Paul Tisdale's working very hard at Celtic. I'm sure he is, but I'm just like, is it fit for purpose in the way that Celtic, because these are Celtic competitors ultimately. Club Brugge are a direct competitor to Celtic at a European level. So are Bodo Glimt as well. Yeah, like these are, it's not just about Celtic and Rangers and then Celtic and Hearts, Celtic and Hibs. Like Celtic need to be looking beyond this and putting in place departments and structures that, they'll cost a fair bit of money, but I think you'll get your money back. And I'm not saying that Celtic are totally allergic to data and analytics. They do use it next time. They do use it to filter out players and come up with recruitment lists. But I just think that some of these other clubs are miles ahead in that sphere as well, and that Celtic probably need to catch up on too.
Yeah, I mean that's it for me. There's two things going on here. There's the manager who can clearly, as we've seen under even Martin O'Neill as caretaker manager, the manager can make a huge difference, and there's a fair chance we get a new manager in, I think, and we see an even greater improvement in performances and how we all feel as fans. But there's always that what's going on in the background at the club, and I think it's a great point you make. In terms of a manager coming in, we all feel good for a bit. And then the club want more control, and we just end up back in this place. And I just think every time we end up back in this place, the kind of trust that we, as fans have towards the the club is eroded further. And I think if we end up back in this place again, it's just going to be even further. We have to see, change beyond just a manager here. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, just the point. It's just like, again, it's about football expertise, and people will think I'm being disparaging about the board and the executive team at Celtic, but I'm not. It's just a statement of fact. Is like these guys have a background in finances and financial kind of legal machinations of how to run a business, and they're probably very good at that, but it's just not what Celtic need to progress in a football sense. And Dermot Desmond said in the blistering statement that he released against Brendan Rodgers, is like Brendan Rodgers had full control of the football department, etc. If that is true, it's arguably more damning than if Celtic had. First of all, I don't know how true it is, but if he's to be taken at his word, then Celtic are admitting they're putting all the power of the football department in the hands of one man who they know is not going to be at Celtic for more than 3 years. How can you build a sustainable football club that progresses year on year, every 5 years, every 10 years, in a wider football context, if that is what you're doing and that's how you are, kind of dishing out the power at Celtic to one guy for 3 years? It's just not going to work. It's not going to work.
And I think, as always, I say this a number of times, but I'd just love to hear from the club and find out, what's going on, what is the plan here, even with regards to like scouting and recruitment, because obviously we're not too far away from the January window, but we never hear these things.
I would love to hear from someone at Celtic explain why they don't use a sporting director of football model. There's a reason for it. There's a reason they've not done it. They did look into it a few years ago. There's a reason why they've not done it. I would love to hear the explanation for why that is, and why they trust this model that, I mean, I don't want to go over all ground of these excuses. We've qualified for Europe 19 times, etc., blah, blah, blah. But they clearly have a trust in how they function. But why are they so reticent to do this thing that has become the norm in football? It's not an exotic thing, Hamish. It's like pretty standard, actually, especially for the clubs who are doing well, And I'm just so curious about what is their reasoning for it? I don't think they've ever communicated that.
No, I just think the frustration is that you feel that if Celtic kind of implemented a more modern structure and had people with football and expertise making the decisions, that would be much better off. Like, it's not as if it's something that we're saying as fans that we just want to see kind of for the sake of it. We're saying it because we actually think it would benefit Celtic, massively, especially on the European side of things. And I have no hope that we're going to get any proper change there, because we've been in this kind of situation before and we end up with just a new manager coming in, and there's a fair chance, as I say, we get a new manager and they massively improve the team and how we're feeling about everything, and this kind of boardroom stuff goes away to an extent, because we've seen that happen in the past. And I can already imagine the new manager coming in and a lot of the detractors towards the collective saying, just shut up, let's just get behind the team, we've got a new manager here. But that's the reality of what might happen here. So interesting times. Will we see a new manager in for St Mirren in 8 or 9 days? Probably not.
I don't know. I've got a funny feeling, actually. I've got a funny feeling it might happen. Last week I was like, this is probably not going to happen. The last week or so in events that have occurred, I've been kind of thinking, maybe, like things will move quickly, I think, once, like you said, Desmond looks someone in the eye and gives them the handshake. I think things can move quickly from that point. So, but as I say, my belief is that any talks that are being reported on are at a very early stage. I don't think it was like we're meeting this manager to give him the job, for example. I think there's a fair bit to run here. And maybe one or two names that we're not really discussing at the moment.
Who did your gut tell you it's going to be? 'Cause I have a gut feeling that it's going to be Wilfried Nancy, just based on the Tisdale connection. I just think the club they're quite reliant on the past, and if they feel there are similarities there with who from the past and what that brought everyone, I think they're quite likely to go down that route again. But you might have different thoughts.
Yeah, I just, again, if you look at all the managers that Celtic have been linked with, the one who fits Celtic, the one who fits the kind of vision of what Celtic have pursued in the past is still Kieran McKenna. So again, I think his contract might be too expensive to buy out. He might be on too high wages. Ultimately, it'll come down to Celtic deciding is he worth pursuing at the kind of price that we would have to pay and the wages that we pay. That the answer to that question might be no. But the profiles of all the managers, that every manager that has been discussed and linked with this Celtic job, you look at Kieran McKenna and he has the profile of manager that Celtic have traditionally pursued over the last 25 years or so. There has been outliers though along the way. You have to say Ronnie Dyler was a bit of an outlier. Ange Postecoglou was a bit of an outlier. But every other manager, even Tony Mowbray, very similar from a profile perspective and a kind of career history perspective to
English
Kieran
football.
McKenna. Yeah, English football, coming through the lower leagues, getting a couple of promotions, like it's been the way of it, you know.
It has actually, yeah.
Yeah, so like I still keep thinking that, and thinking at some point, I think at some point a conversation is going to be had there, whether it's like clandestine and behind closed doors and whoever find out about it or not. I think at some point Celtic will have a conversation with someone involved within McKenna's sphere about the potential of that and what it would look like. Again, I think there is really serious financial considerations. And then, yeah, beyond that, I do look at Nancy and think, well, it's kind of heading in that direction, isn't it? And what happens from that point? I think it'd be a ride, Hamish. It would be a ride. I think it would be, well, it might turn out to be a disaster, but I think it would be a little bit touch of the box office about that one if he did make over.
He's done well for a number of years in the MLS, achieved things. I think he'd do quite well for us, but I admit it might be a bit of a rough start, and that is a real consideration actually, given all of the kind of injury problems we have in the big games round the corner. But then again, like I saw people saying that Ange, Ange, even in his poor start, everyone had faith. Like people were getting quite concerned with Ange's start. Remember, we lost at Livingston. I remember a game we drew against Dundee United the following week, and people were saying, "No, this guy has to go." He had the mental fortitude to get his team to keep believing even in those tough times. So whoever the manager is needs to have a bit of that, because there's probably going to be tough times relatively early on.
I'm going to be brutally honest. If you're giving me a choice between kind of Martin O'Neill for another few months and Wilfried Nancy in this moment, in this set of circumstances, I think I would probably choose O'Neill and Maloney, frankly. Like, and again, I don't think just because I think just the moment Celtic are in mid-season, it's a very difficult situation, and Celtic have already shown over the last few games domestically that I think they've got capability there to kind of push through and put a winning mentality in this team, albeit against perhaps some of the lesser teams in the Scottish Premiership. Then for me, it's just one of those things of we know kind of what we're getting there. Really, we can do all the research and look into this guy all we want. We don't really know how it's going to go until he gets here and what happens. And for me, there's just an element of risk there that I think would be quite a large gamble on Celtic's part if it were to transpire like that. Even taking into the positives, I think it would be a pretty large gamble to just put that guy in place of this situation at Celtic and go, right, deal with it, do the job. Unless Celtic also have the fortitude to stick with him and see out a bit of flack if it doesn't go well initially, if it doesn't go well for the first couple of months. They would need to back this guy massively, because I don't think you just put him in, expect miracles to happen, and if miracles don't happen, hang him out to dry. I think that would be very unfair.
Yeah. I think that's a fair point, and I know exactly what you're saying in terms of Martin O'Neill. It feels kind of steady. It feels as if you know what you're going to get. Probably not much in Europe, but that's more down to the squad than Martin O'Neill, obviously. But domestically, at least he'll keep us steady. I think I just feel like I want that new manager. I want that journey to begin now or in a few days rather than in a few months. I've loved having Martin O'Neill back, but it's temporary. I feel like I want that new era to begin so I can fully get behind
get
something,
that too.
even if there's difficult moments.
Again,
you only have to beat You only have to beat some Scottish teams, and that's famously easy to do. So Yeah, it's interesting.
There's also kind of like, as this guy, does he face defensive minded teams? MLS, very open league, not particularly tactically adept. Like, how many low block defences or deep defensive lines does Columbus Crew face on a week to week basis? I've not done that kind of research into it, but I would hazard a guess that it's not that much, and that's a totally different, again, a totally different environment for what this guy would be coming into.
Yeah. Anything else today? Anything on your mind?
No, I think that's it. I'm pretty focused on this management stuff at the moment, and also just like this kind of thinking about this. Are Celtic actually prepared for a new manager coming in? And again, my frank and brutal answer to that is no. I don't think Celtic are very well prepared to launch a new era. I think it's going to be quite messy for a little bit of a period yet, unless, like I say, miracles happen. But it's just a messy situation. This is going to be a thing that a lot of people are going to, fans are going to need to have fortitude and patience for as well, regardless of who comes in. You know, it's not just about the manager, the club. Like, supporters are going to have to see out a little bit of a messy spell here, on and off the pitch. I think there's a lot of, you know, you're seeing it with the kind of going to war with ultra groups, going to war with the fans, fan collective. It's just it's not coming together, frankly, is what I would say. Although, again, credit to Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney for stabilising domestic results on the pitch with all that backdrop.
Yeah, we need a unifying figure. And to be fair, I think the three guys we've spoken about mainly on this have that about them. I think they're all absolutely adored by the fans at their clubs at the moment. So if it's any of those three, I think they would certainly have us, fully backing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just another thing, like, they're all very different profiles. They come from different backgrounds, different parts of the world, but they all share similar traits, actually, in the way they go about having success at their football clubs. It's all about establishing an overall culture, having a clear tactical identity that is based on attacking, possession-based football. Like, these are the kinds of managers that you expect Celtic to pursue. So at least in that sense, there's an element of, like, comfort there. They're not going for Steve Clark, for example, or like a manager who's just tactically completely at odds with what you would think about a Celtic team functioning.
Okay, we'll leave it there for now, everyone. Thanks once again for tuning in, watching, and we'll catch up with you all very soon. Speak to you then.